And joining us now, fresh, well, sort of fresh, from a long day spent poring over the numbers in the Ontario budget lockup. Let's get the view from the press gallery with Alison Jones. She's president of the Queen's Park Press Gallery and Ontario politics reporter for the Canadian Press. And our old pal Martin Regcon is here as well. He's the political columnist for the Toronto Star. Welcome, everybody. Nice to have you two here as well for analysis of budget 2017-18. Let's start the same way. We heard that the Liberals' headline is budget imbalance and pharmacare to boot. What's your headline?
I would say it's fairly similar, but with an addendum. Balanced budget with billions in new health promises, with an election 1 year out, designed to broadly appeal to people in Ontario.
You're adding this addendum about the election because that's what? Overarching everything. Is that the idea?
It is. That's the context in which they're bringing this. The budget is clearly designed to appeal to basically everybody. People who use the health system, people who own or rent a house, people who pay electricity bills. That's almost everybody in Ontario. And we're 1 year away from the start of the election campaign. That's not a coincidence.
MRC, I know you don't write the headlines for your columns, but go ahead, take one on now.
Sometimes we do for the online because it fits. But a variation on Alison's theme or headline would be, this is not so much a pre-election budget, but a pre-election budget, because we're about 13 months out, and it very much has the tenor, the tone of a classic pre-election budget on the eve of an election. And the subhead, or the kicker, as Vic Fideli would say, is that the war is on between the progressive parties, the Liberals, and the centre-leftist Liberals and lefty New Democrats. There is a battle on for the hearts and votes of progressive voters, and the Tories are kind of playing in that box as well, a little bit.
Can I get you both to weigh in on, I guess, what is one of the biggest issues around the budget, and you heard Vic Fideli talk about it. He doesn't think it's really balanced. Minister Sousa, of course, thinks it is. Is one side making a more persuasive case, Alison, than the other on this?
I mean, I think they're both kind of right in a sense. As the finance minister pointed out today, you've got the revenue side, you've got the expense side. They even out, except for a little tiny little bit of surplus that's being used as a reserve fund. So in that sense of the word, yeah, it's absolutely balanced. But I think Vic Fideli has a point too, in that some of this money is one-time money, and it's not necessarily the structural deficit that maybe he's looking for.
Martin?
Look, a budget is the toughest day of the year for the opposition. It's their job to go and pick things apart. Every budget in government and in companies has a creative accounting element to it, but they still have to play by the rules at the end of the day. And so a shell game it's a double entendre. I mean, yes, they're moving money around. Is it sinister or corrupt in some way? No, this is not. There is not any rating of pension funds, as Mr. Fideli made clear. There are very arcane accounting questions about whether a surplus can count. And as much as TVO and its hosts love to dive deep into the weeds, it would take us two programs to go into whether it's right or not to count a pension surplus as an overall surplus.
Okay. Once again, I know that, and I said this off the top of the program, there are a lot of people in this province who think these guys have been spending like drunken sailors for the 14 years they've been in power. And yet they tell us in the budget papers that over the last 5 years, they've actually been holding spending increases on programming to 1.8% on average per year, which is below the rate of inflation. They think they've been tough on spending, which might explain why so many special interest groups out there are actually not all that happy with them before today. Question, Alison, have they opened up the spigot a little more in this budget?
I think they definitely have, and that's a result of coming to balance. As the finance minister said today, once they've had this target for a very long time, getting to balance in 2017-18. They've been throwing everything they've got at it. Politically, they needed to do it. They've, sunk so much into the promise. Now that the budget is balanced, just in time for an election around the corner, they do have a bit more room to, as you say, open the tap and spend some more money.
So, Martin, hospitals, for example, have been screaming, till they're blue in the face at them for the last few years. They got more money in this budget. Child care advocates, they got more money in this budget. Post-secondary education, they got more money for stuff in this budget. As a political document, not a financial one, but as a political one, do you think the Liberals have satisfied those supporters enough to bring them back on side?
In general, yes. Don't forget hydro, which is part of which is also coming from the tax base, part of which will be done through ratepayers. The City of Toronto is not happy. I think there's a feeling that more could have been done for social housing.
John Tory said that tonight. The Mayor of Toronto came out and said, we made our priorities pretty clear, and they have not met them.
So that hasn't happened, but John Tory doesn't get to vote. And the City of Toronto tends to be Liberal-friendly in general, so maybe that was a political calculation that they made. Let's not forget the teachers, who have also had increases that more or less satisfy them in this latest round after paying a price in the previous rounds. Doctors were offered some money. They didn't take it, but they were offered an increase. I know they'll get hate mail for saying that, but you know that there was actually an increase in the overall packet. So they have offered money all around, and that's because they have had an enormous, a significant, dramatic surge in revenues because of a very strong economy in the last couple of years.
Okay, we always tell our guests to park their cynicism at the door over there before they come into the studio, because we don't run a cynical operation here. However, here's the where are we here? Okay, that's your budget for 2017-18. It's funny, it's not red. It's very unusual. It's almost 300 pages long. And in almost 300 pages, in a budget that's got to have tens of thousands of numbers in here, there's no mention of their signature plan, which is pharmacare.
So Allison and I were whispering to each other as we were listening to your previous guests and searching our memories and actually searching our PDF files, and Allison should take the credit for this. But I was asking myself too, did I imagine reading this in the budget papers? It's a long day. So it is actually in the big fat budget document, but not the number.
Exactly.
And I think your guests were,
million.
I think your guests were implying that there was no mention of pharmacare whatever in the budget document.
There's not much. I will say in that giant document, I think it's about 1 page mentions pharmacare, and 3/4 of that page talks about sort of the general premise of pharmacare and not this specific plan. There's 2 paragraphs that talk about this plan.
But in a book,
nowhere
which has got
in
thousands
there
of numbers,
is the price tag.
They didn't cost their signature program.
That's right.
What are we going to infer from that?
Well, if you were to ask Andrea Horvath, as we did today, coming just a week after, or in the same week that her party unveiled a pharmacare plan, she said that this smells like a back of the napkin planning. Just sort of slipped in there, 1-page mention, no price tag, maybe figured out after the budget was printed. We only are hearing about this price tag, the $465 million a year estimate, because officials with the Ministry of Finance sort of came around and told us all in the lockup today. So that's really the only place we're getting that number from.
So let me ask you the direct question. The NDP raised their universal pharmacare program as a campaign commitment, which they will make in a year's time, at their convention a week ago. Do you think the Liberals heard that, panicked, and stuck something into the budget quickly to say, yeah, us too?
I can't read their minds. I don't think so. I think they were playing with the number over the last few weeks. This budget the budget date was set rather late, and a lot was up in the air in this budget. So do I think they stole the idea? Don't think so. I asked about pharmacare a couple of months ago because I sensed that given their overall agenda for this coming election, that ought to be in there, and I couldn't get on any confirmation one way or another, just some funny looks. So they're different program designs. Quite different, in fact. Both of them are partial, and both are very positive in their own way. And I would suggest that and certainly the number is not in the document. So clearly they were fiddling with the number at the last moment. You know what? Even if it's a back of the envelope calculation, we should celebrate that pharmacare is finally coming to Ontario, partial, 52 years after Medicare. And even Patrick Brown, the leader of the Progressive Conservatives, is not shooting it down. And we were huddling afterwards about, did he say he'd buy into it, and did Mr. Fedeli? At least he is saying he's not suggesting that he'll tear this apart. It's not going to be the Republicans in the U.S. saying we're going to destroy Obamacare. So if pharmacare has finally arrived by hook or by crook, full credit to the NDP for standing behind it, and full credit for the Liberals for running with it.
Let's do remember that Mitt Romney quote, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander? Okay, Liberals used to hate Stephen Harper's boutique tax credits for music lessons and hockey equipment and, all of these other things, riding public transit. And yet here it is in the Liberal budget, seniors tax credit for riding public transit. What's going on?
I mean, I think like a lot in the budget. It's designed to appeal to a certain audience. That tax credit is one of a number of measures for seniors. I think they also might have seen an opportunity when the federal government canceled the public transit tax credit in its budget to sort of ride in and save the day for seniors who maybe were looking to use that. It's not going to cost them that much money. I think they've allocated $10 million a year to pay for this transit tax credit. So it's not a big buy for them, but it might buy a much larger amount of public support.
Yeah, it's ink, isn't it? They do get ink over it.
A little bit of ink for a little bit of money, because it amounts to $110 or $20
$130,
as
I
a
think,
tax
per person
credit
per year.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, give me a break.
Give me a break, but here we are talking about it, and it is one of those sort of irresistible little baubles that people do pay attention to.
I think most people's reaction was cynical, that, you know, here we are, it's so important to have a youth pharmacare program, but here's a senior bauble as well, and it just struck me as again, a pre-election giveaway.
On the issue of housing, I do want to follow up particularly on the Mayor of Toronto's comments because, okay, how much background do we want to put in place here? 20 years ago when Mike Harris was Premier, he kind of downloaded social housing onto municipalities. And that sort of resulted in a lot of consequences, the likes of which are still being felt today. There is a huge backlog for repairs and for need of social housing in the major cities of this province. And the Mayor of Toronto tonight said, the province knows what our priorities are, and they have not been met in this budget. A lot of kudos for this budget, but not from the Mayor of Toronto. You know, who's covered in glory on this, I guess, is where we want to start with this. Alison, did the government do a good enough job today on the social housing file to satisfy its critics?
You know, I was surprised. I thought we were going to see more on the social housing, on the affordable housing side. Charles Sousa himself hinted as much yesterday. We were trying to get him to, you know, spill the beans on some of the things that were going to be in the budget, and he essentially said there'd be measures for housing affordability, as in the housing plan they already announced. There won't be anything new on that, but there will be something on affordable housing. And yet when you look through the budget, there really is no new cash on that score.
And there's hundreds of millions of dollars of backlog that is required right now, and it's not in this budget. What do we infer from that? Well,
that's why I raised it. They are the biggest unsatisfied constituency, that being City Hall. Mm-hmm. But remember, the headline and the kicker is it's a pre-election budget, and there aren't any votes.
Let's just clarify that. There's another budget coming next year?
Correct. Yes.
Before the June 7th election, so there'll be one more spring budget to come before the election.
A pre-election budget that follows this pre-pre. So there are no votes significant votes in social housing compared to a seniors tax credit, a youth pharmacare program, or building hospitals or building roads. And so because it's what I described it as, this is their opportunity to get reelected with the money they have and the allocations they can afford.
Let me just talk to our director for a second. Sheldon, we got that clip standing by of the finance minister? Okay, good. Let me set this up. Most budget speeches you see, I think it's fair to say, don't really have moments of fantastic drama. You know, they're budget speeches, for goodness sakes. But there were a couple of moments in the legislature today when the finance minister got up there and really, well, let's let him say it. Go ahead, roll the clip, please.
Mr. Speaker, all of us have cared for someone who needed our help, maybe a child or a parent. Some of us are sandwiched between supporting our children and caring for our aging parents. My wife, Zenny, has been a champion in caring for her disabled mom and dad.
Now, he went on to speak for another few seconds and then had to stop again to compose himself. This is highly unusual on Budget Day. What'd you think?
Absolutely, and that was actually the first time I had seen it, because in the aftermath of the budget lockup, where there's pretty frantic in the press gallery trying to file, it's very, very interesting. The first thing that comes to mind is the questions that you were asking the finance minister not too long ago about his future. That question came up in the budget lockup. There's been a lot of, rumors, speculation, I'll say, within the press gallery of, will this be his last budget? Will he bring it to balance and then say, I'm out, leave on a high note? Kind of has me wondering whether that was part of the part of the emotion of the day. He seemed a little more firm in his answer to you this evening on his intention to run again.
A little wiggle room there still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
What did you
interesting.
think when you saw that?
Well, yeah, Alison's right. Confession, we read the speech in advance when we're locked up, so we don't listen to him afterwards, and so I've just seen it now. But Mr. Sousa lost his father in the last couple of years, and he was very close to him as well. And all politicians, especially cabinet ministers and especially finance ministers, carry a reservoir of guilt because they offload a lot of their family responsibilities on their families. So I think he saw a bit of that. And probably weighing on his mind, as Alison and you have suggested, is his future and the speculation that having delivered this balanced budget, it's time to move on before the deluge, if that's what's coming. But at least he didn't say, I have no plans to have no plans, because you might have caught him out on that.
Taken. That line was taken already.
Bill Davis reference, sorry.
We got exactly right. Okay, we got about a minute left here, so let me give 30 seconds to each one of you two. Obviously, as a, what'd you call it, Martin, a pre-election budget? Okay, obviously this is designed to improve their polling numbers in the lead up to the June 2018 election. Did it have that effect, do you suppose?
You know, I would say if I didn't know anything about the polling numbers right now, I would say this budget has a good chance of improving any fortunes they've got come next year. Knowing the polling numbers, I'm not sure that anything can raise them to the levels that they need to be at this point.
Martin.
Well, I never make predictions, and I never rule anybody out in today's politics and with today's polling. I would say that remember, the Liberals are not trying to win a popularity contest anymore with Kathleen Wynne. They're trying to win a policy contest, as it were, and they need to they need to deal with the New Democrats, who might otherwise cannibalize their vote. And I think it was a tough day for New Democrats, who did a good job on pharmacare and have had this kind of taken away from them.
Great. Alison Jones, CP. Martin Redcon, Toronto Star. It's really good of you to spend budget night with us here on TVO. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.